Welcome friends to another Dune video. Today we draw from the Heir of Caladan, where the Sardaukar descend on Caladan in an effort to wipe out the nobles of the Landsraad that have been plotting against the Emperor, or so the Emperor thinks. Leto is amongst those people because Shaddam does not know that Leto has infiltrated that group to bring them down from within. And just add a little detail here, it's not specifically the Landsraad, but a group of nobles within the Landsraad called the League of Nobles. Paul is acting duke at this time whilst his father is away. What choices will he make? Friends, let's find out. Alarm sounds inside the castle. Military vessels, the Sardaukar, are coming. Paul looked from the ramparts at Cala City spaceport. Paul could hear the ships tearing through the atmosphere, hundreds. Paul thought of the other noble families that had been wiped out by the Emperor, who was now trying to remove the thorn of the League of Nobles from his side. Gurney says they cannot withstand the Sardaukar invasion. Duncan says this is the best and worst kind of training for Paul to have. The shields are activated around the castle, but Paul worries about the citizens outside of it. After, they go below into the command centre within the castle to hear the Sardaukar, but nothing comes through, as they make no announcements of their approach, ask for no flight paths or landing permissions, they simply land. Gurney sends the Atreides forces to strategic positions to meet them. Paul says they have to convince the Sardaukar his father is only working with Jason and the League of Nobles to bring them down. Gurney says Shaddam wants to send a message written in blood. Thufir says with analysis, first they will level the town and spaceport, and then we, referring to himself, Paul, etc., will be helpless behind the shields. Paul remembers his father's message, a farewell to him, hoping against hope this might convince the Sardaukar. Paul says to issue a message that he will talk face to face with the Sardaukar commander. Outside the castle, he could hear explosions and screams. Paul looked for the message spool, but found it had gone. The commander they faced, Colonel Bashar Chapati Colonna, had been against Leto up to a point. Leto's father, Paulus, had hurt the Colonna family and caused him to be recruited into the Sardaukar, the Emperor's Blades. But since he had seen the heart of the man and seen what Leto had tried to do to right the legacy against his own family, the Colonnas, and so Chapati found it hard to believe what he heard about Leto and his current actions, even though he was ordered to attack Caladan. Colonna's fleet washed over the small city spaceport like an ocean storm. More than 100 troop carriers sat down on the landing fields and even in public plazas of the quaint capital town. Uniformed Sardaukar emerged from the carriers, wearing body shields and carrying weapons, prepared to carry out a massacre, just like on Kuate. It dismayed Colonna to see how many of his comrades were grinning with glee at what they would unleash. His fighters swarmed into the spaceport control tower and the terminal facilities, taking hostages, replacing the controllers in the operation centres. He received reports that soldiers in the town had already slaughtered 100 civilians who foolishly tried to defend their homes. The people of Caladan seemed recklessly patriotic, not intimidated by Sardaukar. They must be mad. Colonna's heart was heavy because he knew the Emperor wanted him to lay waste to all this, just as he had down on those other planets. The story then jumps to Yui, who had Paul's message, his salvation, in his hand. He'd taken it to protect himself and his partner, who were under threat from the Harkonnens. As the envoy ship came to speak with Paul, some patriotic Caladan people tried to protect their duke, but the Sardaukar crushed them. Paul says to drop the shields, as it will only delay the inevitable if the Sardaukar attack. And then he speaks to Colonna. Colonna says Leto has joined the radical movement under rebel leader Jason Aru. Paul explains his father's motives, but Colonna says things cannot stop without evidence. Paul offers to speak to a truth-sayer. Colonna says there is no one with them to fulfill that role. Then Yui joins them to say he had the proof that Paul wanted. Paul questions why he had it, and Yui just says it was misplaced with good intentions. The message to Paul is played, but Colonna says it's not enough. The Emperor was significantly angry. Yours shows a second message Leto has recorded. Before leaving Caladan for the infiltration, Leto had dispatched a message for the Emperor in the form of Gurney Halleck, but it was intercepted, and briefly returning to Caladan, Leto recorded another message, so as things turned dire, it could be used. The Bashar listens, and Thufir says an attack now would go against the code of the Sardaukar. Clone says, with the evidence, it brings into question if the Duke is a rebel, and that he knows Leto's sense of honour. The Bashar finishes with, given this new information, my orders are subject to change. The Padisha Emperor commanded us to eradicate all rebels, and it is no longer certain that Leto Atreides is truly one of the rebels. Few Sardaukar officers would be receptive to such new information, but I have personal experience with your father. I know his sense of honour. His past actions do not match the Emperor's assumptions or accusations. I must bring this new information back to Kaitain and seek further guidance from the Emperor. Of course it will be checked for authenticity, but I suspect it will pass any tests. Then he leaves. Duncan and Gurney look at Paul in new admiration, while Thufir Hawat nodded to himself. The Mentat spoke to Paul. Young master, you took a risk in facing the Sardaukar down like that. I'm sorry I doubted your decision. The Duke will be quite proud of you. And friends, that's where we end today's video. Drop me a comment if you've got something to say.